You said earlier when we were talking about this game that you didn't really have concerns with Matthew Stafford and his elbow, more of like a pain tolerance kind of thing. Matthew Stafford, however, is one of those quarterbacks, almost like the entire league, that, you could start if you want in that kind of rough middle tier. Are you going to go ahead and insert Matthew Stafford in your lineups this week, week one?
Yes, I am. If you drafted him, you drafted him pretty late as a low-end QB1. And like I mentioned, I'm not too concerned about the elbow injury. If it's a pain tolerance thing, like I said, he's played through separated shoulders, injured backs. So if there's anybody that can do it, it's him. The matchup itself got a bit easier when Tre'Davious White was ruled out for the first 4 games. This is going to be a high-scoring game where the Rams are going to have to keep their foot on the gas for all 4 quarters. So I'm treating Matthew Stafford as the typical low-end QB1 that he is. So I'm starting him this week.
All right, fair enough. Samantha Praviti is with us as well. You can see her all over the place here on the Action Network on the Fantasy Flex podcast, which I will be joining her with on Mondays. But Samantha, talk to me about Cam Akers, the Rams running back. Sean's got the under on him as a prop play. He's splitting time with Darrell Henderson. What do you think about Cam Akers today? Is he a start in fantasy lineups?
So I'm pretty concerned about him, and I would probably sit him if I had better options on my bench. Now, there's a really good chance you drafted him as your RB2, and that's just the reality. You're going to have to play him. But the matchup isn't ideal, nor is the injury history or Sean McVay's affinity for the running back by committee. Even when Akers was healthy in his rookie campaign, McVay could not commit to any one running back and instead opted for this weird tripartite committee. Based on his tendencies and Akers' injury history, it just feels unlikely to me that he's going to allow the third-year back to shoulder a full workload right out of the gate or ever. So I may be lower than most on Akers, who could be a major bust this season. I would consider starting guys like Rashad Penny or Clyde Edwards-Helaire over him this week.
Okay, and also Penny, especially if Kenneth Walker is not going, then Penny may have that backfield to himself on Monday night. Sean, let me go to you. Samantha talked about running backs by committee, and there's kind of a committee in Buffalo as well. Singletary, we think, will get the first snaps, but there's Moss. They drafted the kid Cook out of Georgia as well. What do you think about Devin Singletary? Should he be in lineups right out the gate in week one?
Yeah, so he's a tough call because, like you said, this should be more of a committee. Last year, the Bills used him as a workhorse back over the final 4 games and through their playoff run, and he came through. He was the number 2 overall back in fantasy over the final 4 games. So I'm down on him this year. I think James Cook, the rookie, like you mentioned, is going to eat into his receiving usage. Zach Moss is apparently back in the good graces of the coaching staff, so he's going to eat into his early down work. However, this is opening night against the Rams. This is a playoff type game. So I think if anything, they're going to use him like they did in high leverage games at the end of last season. I think he will see a pretty big workload. So he's more of a high end RB3 flex option for me tonight. And I think next week going forward, once Cook gets a little bit more experience, that's when his value will drop. But I think this week is the time to start Singletary if he's your best option.
And Samantha, one other player that I think is really interesting is Buffalo Bills tight end Dawson Knox. When you look at the tight end position, right, you have the true studs, your Andrews, your Kelseys, your Wallers, your Pitts, right? But then after that, tight end, many people believe is almost touchdown dependent, right? You're not getting a lot of other tight ends that have 5, 6, 7 catches a day. Could Dawson Knox actually crack into that second tier? Do you actually think he is a start because he's a little bit more than just touchdown dependent?
Yeah, I agree that he's not just touchdown dependent. He's in a high-powered offense that he's going to see a lot of targets. He's been one of my favorite young tight ends since he was selected by the Bills in the 3rd round in 2019. Bit of an afterthought his first 2 seasons, but we kind of know that's like the trend with tight ends. It takes them a little bit of time.
Yes.
He's fresh off of a breakout campaign in which he finished as the tight end 7.5 PPR, just inked a monster extension yesterday. So I think he was a solid late round pick, assuming he's on your team. You probably got him in like the 8th round or something like that. He could easily return an investment. I mean, assuming you don't have one of those premium tight ends, which is probably the case, like assuming you don't have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce or Kyle Pitts, he's a no-brainer start this season, this week and moving on.